McGraw-Hill Ascent Audio presents More Than a Pink Cadillac, Mary Kay Incorporated's 9 Leadership Keys to Success by Jim Underwood. Narrated by Rudy, Sanda. Publisher's Note: in this audio edition, you will hear references to figures present in the print and ebook formats of the book. The work is provided as is. McGraw-Hill and its licensors make no guarantees or warranties as to the accuracy, adequacy, or completeness of or results to be obtained from using the work, including any information that can be accessed through the work via hyperlink or otherwise, and expressly disclaim any warranty, express or implied, including but not limited to implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. McGraw-Hill and its licensors do not warrant or guarantee that the functions contained in the work will meet your requirements, or that its operation will be uninterrupted or error-free. Neither McGraw-Hill nor its licensors shall be liable to you or anyone else for any inaccuracy, error, or omission, regardless of cause in the work, or for any damages resulting therefrom. McGraw-Hill has no responsibility for the content of any information accessed through the work. Under no circumstances shall McGraw-Hill and or its licensors be liable for any indirect, incidental, special, punitive, consequential, or similar damages that result from the use of or inability to use the work, even if any of them has been advised of the possibility of such damages. This limitation of liability shall apply to any claim or cause whatsoever, whether such claim or cause arises in contract, tort, or otherwise. Preface. For nearly 3 decades, my answer to the question, "How are you?" has never been anything but great. I must admit that as I close in on my 70th birthday, feeling physically great is not always possible. But when I answer that question with great, I'm referring not to my physical state, but to my emotional state. Everyone at Mary Kay, Inc. responds the same way to that question. Why? Because we all learned from Mary Kay Ash herself that there is no other acceptable answer. If you're ever in the vicinity of our world headquarters in Dallas, test us. Stop any employee and ask her how she is. I guarantee it, she'll be great. Our leaders in particular take this lesson to heart. Occasionally, people from outside our organization, and sometimes even new employees, challenge this response as insincere, even phony. But these cynics miss the essential point of what we take to be leadership. Emotional leadership is fundamental to leadership success. Leaders influence the emotional mindset of every individual within an organization. Speaking for myself, I am mindful that great cannot be insincere if it's going to work the way Mary Kay intended it to work. It must be values-driven, part of the ingrained culture of an organization. Thanks to Mary Kay, we have a purpose, and each of us believes he or she has a special duty to perform. We have elected to serve others and find great satisfaction in the giving. Mary Kay called it our go-give spirit. Our purpose, or mission, is to enrich women's lives. Obviously, you can't do this unless your mindset is based on seeing the glass as half full. But as Jim Underwood explains in the following chapters, we believe that you also can't fulfill the Mary Kay mission unless you follow the Golden Rule. As to the Pink Cadillac in this book's title, yes, that's the best-known image of our company, and probably one of the most recognizable symbols in the history of marketing. And yes, it's a form of recognition for an individual who has done an outstanding job of distributing our products, which happen to be cosmetics. But this trophy on wheels is a symbol of something far greater. It is a symbol of a whole way of doing business which we call the Mary Kay way. This book provides insights into a unique and phenomenally successful business. It is a business that grew out of, and is still founded on, a simple set of powerful principles. But let me start at the beginning. Mary Kay Ash, our founder, had few advantages when she was young. But one that she did have was her mother's constant encouragement. "You can do it," the mother told the daughter. and the lesson stuck. It was sorely tested when Mary Kay started her career in direct sales as a Stanley Home Parties dealer just after World War II. She learned very quickly that she could not stand up at a Stanley party and explain to her hostess and guests that because she wasn't feeling well that evening, they would have to excuse her substandard demonstration. As Mary Kay liked to say, "That dog won't hunt." She knew she had to be great, or most likely there would be no sales and no profits, and her young family might go hungry. After setting up her own company, she learned another lesson about the positive power of great. When those around her became more positive because of her attitude, they became more enthusiastic, and performance soared. She often said, "Act enthusiastic, and you'll be enthusiastic." She added, "Nothing great was ever accomplished without enthusiasm." Mary Kay knew that in each human being there is a purpose. In her words, God didn't have time to make a nobody, only a somebody. Many people outside our organization might consider these phrases trite, but they were one important way Mary Kay influenced other people's emotions and exerted her leadership. Management scholar John Cotter writes that leadership consists of creating a vision, aligning others to that vision, and then inspiring them to achieve the vision. In my opinion, no one in American business has done that better than Mary Kay Ash. Mary Kay knew her purpose in life. She also knew somehow that her purpose was larger than her own life. When Morley Safer of TV's 60 Minutes news magazine suggested that she was using God to further her own ambition, Mary Kay responded without hesitation that he had it backward. She sincerely believed that God was using her to accomplish his purposes. She was confident that there was a grand pattern to her life. In the 30 years I knew her, I never saw her waver from her purpose, not once. I invite you to think about how many people you've met about whom you'd say the same thing. Mary Kay viewed her company as a family, a living community that she strove to perpetuate. She talked of P&L not as profit and loss, but as people and love. She knew that maximizing profits could not serve as the driving purpose of a company that hoped to sustain itself over decades. Make no mistake, Mary Kay knew profits were important, but they were only a means to an end. They would finance the next round of investments and make possible the next installment in a saga of enriching women's lives. She knew she had to be generous, investing in her employees and the members of her independent sales force. And she had to build binding ties of trust and loyalty, starting within the corporate family and extending all the way to her tens of millions of customers. A few years ago, at the annual World Economic Forum, WEF, at Davos, Switzerland, I got into a public debate with Michael Hammer, who had just published his book, Re-Engineering the Corporation, which was beginning to make waves in corporate America. I disagreed with Hammer on some key philosophical points having to do with re-engineering, the central prescription of which seemed to boil down to the far less attractive process of downsizing. Since then, despite setbacks to the larger field of re-engineering, downsizing is still rampant among U.S. corporations. Mass layoffs continued at a record high in the early years of the 21st century, with an average of almost 2 million workers expelled from their jobs annually. Since that time, downsizing seems to be corporate America's favored approach to increasing productivity and profits, enhancing shareholder value, and dominating global competition. Of the world's top 1,000 corporate leaders attending that WEF meeting, I'd guess a majority shared this view of corporate responsibility and leadership. In fact, in my 40 years of executive experience, which has included much contact with fellow business leaders, one version or another of this approach, vision and strategy couched in warlike, almost inhuman terms, has been the rule rather than the exception. What's interesting and troubling about this is that employees and organizations view leadership in entirely different terms. They want their leaders to have high integrity, show respect, be honest, be fair, and even be compassionate. Shouldn't we listen to them if we want their best? I try to conduct myself as a servant leader, and I suggest that the most effective leaders in history have had the same mindset. I really believe corporations can be major instruments of social change, as Mary Kay has been in empowering women. They also can serve a higher purpose, as in advancing women's health, funding cancer research, eliminating violence against women, and preserving the environment. I believe the success of future corporate leaders will be measured not by gargantuan profits, obscene executive stock options, and simple shareholder wealth creation, but by contributions to sustainable communities, ecosystems, and economies, and, above all, as custodians of the human spirit. These elements should define and drive a leader's purpose. Mary Kay got at her purpose in many ways both large and small. I distinctly recall our internal telephone directory when I joined the company in 1973. It was in alphabetical order by first name. She knew the value of operating like a small company, really more like an extended family. That practice still lives today. Top executives of this company, whose independent sales force numbers more than 900,000, still take the time to call each person who has a family tragedy, a health problem, an accident, or a death, to let each one know that we care as an extended family about her or him as an individual. We also remember birthdays and the Christmas holiday with a personal card, not to mention letters praising career accomplishments. It's vital to us to maintain the connectedness of a small, tightly knit family, even though we have become a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. When I was president of Mary Kay, Inc., I insisted on taking every call that came to my office from the field sales organization. Thanks to our excellent customer service training, the vast majority of such calls that might have ended up in my office were answered satisfactorily before they reached me, but the offer stood. You probably can guess that as a hands-on leader, only steps down the hall from Mary Kay Ash, I liked being in touch with our customers. Truth be told, when our customer service improved to the extent that I started feeling out of things, I found a new way to stay personally connected. I would often slip down to the Director Information Services telephone bank, pop on a headset, and answer calls for a while. It wouldn't take me long to get a feel for the attitude of the field or to figure out where our next business challenge might be coming from. I learned to listen carefully from Mary Kay. She believed that being a good listener is vital to being a good leader, and she made all of us around her believe that as well. But there was something more her leadership style required of me: to think like a woman. Mary Kay reminded me on more than one occasion that I was thinking like a man on some issue. That mindset simply won't cut it in a company with an independent sales force of nearly 1 million women, and so I and other males learned what, for lack of a better term, might be called empathetic thinking. And we are better leaders for it. Earlier, I noted that Mary Kay Ash had a sense of destiny. She also had a keen sense of her own mortality. In the early 1970s, she personally took on the challenge, through books, speeches, videos, meetings, and other media, of making sure that her life's mission would carry on after her. She also knew she would need people who understood how to perpetuate her beliefs. As Jim Underwood explains, she focused on what she called her national sales directors, the top rank of the independent sales organization. She entrusted those leaders with her purpose, insisting over and over that they had to be prepared to carry on our mission when she no longer could. The Nationals, as we affectionately call them, did take up her purpose when Mary Kay became ill and after her death on November 22, 2001. Few leaders have surrounded themselves with such an all-encompassing succession plan, and few have executed it so masterfully. Although she frequently operated in the realm of the visionary, Mary Kay also understood that we had to implement on a day-to-day level in order to perform our jobs excellently. When she hired her first employees, she developed a small pink card that spelled out our service promise to our customers in fine detail. 40 years later, we still provide this card to new employees. Because of our relationships with our sales organization and theirs with their customers, we have to be a zero-tolerance company in terms of implementation errors. Back orders are costly, of course, but we think of them in more human terms. They cause pain for both the salesperson and her customer. Shoddy or impolite service will cause the immediate and direct loss of a customer, but more than that, the customer will link any ill will to the person she bought the product from, as well as the company whose name is on the package. We invest heavily in training and in state-of-the-art customer service contact programs, such as our Preferred Customer Program and Internet programs, to ensure that our customers are surrounded by service. Yet, we realize that we can never do enough. Jim Underwood quotes one of our favorite Mary Kay sayings, "Never rest on your laurels. Nothing wilts faster than a laurel sat upon." As this book goes to press, the company is investing tens of millions more dollars in a new supply chain management system that will alter every employee's job within a year or two. When that program is complete, there will be another system improvement, and then another. When it comes to providing better customer service, change is constant. The secret to coping with change in an environment like ours is to rely on what doesn't change, the values that drive our organization. Jim Underwood has appropriately made those values the centerpiece of his book, and we thank him for that. Mary Kay, Inc. is composed of ethical leaders whose purpose does not waver. When we change, we do so because we think we have found a better way to accomplish our purpose. Our assumption is that if we change without reference to our purpose, we will get into trouble, and if we do that often enough, we will fail. But we won't fail, because we've been taught by the Master. We know our purpose. It's enriching women's lives. Dick Bartlett, Vice Chairman, Mary Kay, Inc., August 2003. Introduction. A different kind of company. I get interesting reactions when I tell people I've been studying the Mary Kay organization. "Oh," they say, "that's the company I've seen on the news. The one that gives out those pink Cadillacs." Almost everybody knows that much about Mary Kay, Inc., but beyond a little knowledge of the company's products, cosmetics, few people outside the company know anything more. Mary Kay, Inc. is a lot more than a symbolic pink Cadillac. In fact, the reason why a business strategist like me was eager to write this book is that Mary Kay, Inc. is one of the best-run and most successful companies in the world. Consider the following. From its humble beginnings with a $5,000 investment by the founder, the company now does over $1.4 billion in global wholesale, which is $2.8 billion at retail, sales worldwide. Mary Kay, Inc. is a leading e-business. The company has averaged double-digit growth almost every year of its existence. The company's global sales organization has operations in 33 countries. The company has 900,000 independent beauty consultants worldwide. I will explain how the company has achieved this extraordinary growth and success, but first I want to tell 3 short personal stories that relate to the larger story. A vendor encounters Mary Kay, Inc. A number of years ago, as freshly minted Masters of Business Administration, MBAs, a classmate and I decided we would go out into the world and put all the entrepreneurial knowledge we had recently gained to work. We had the opportunity to buy a small office products and furniture company, and we thought that would be a great place to get our start. In those days, my partner and I did it all. If a driver called in sick, we drove a truck. If a customer had a pressing need, one of us would jump in the car and deliver the customer's order. At night, we stayed after hours and packed orders. One of the first customers we acquired was a new company on the Dallas scene called Mary Kay Cosmetics. Although we were only a vendor of office products and furniture, It did not take us long to realize that not only was Mary Kay a growing company, it was an unusual company. If you want to get an inside peek at a company, here's a really good strategy. Sell office furniture and then spend your days on the site putting the client's furniture together. It's amazing what you can see and hear when you put on a pair of blue jeans and a short-sleeved shirt and crawl around under desks tightening bolts. You're invisible, and you will learn a lot. My partner and I learned a lot about a lot of companies, some 400 in all in those days. We heard the tirades of disgruntled executives and the demands for respect from subordinates. We saw it all. Most of it wasn't particularly surprising. It was more or less what we expected based on our prior life experiences and our business education. But what we saw at Mary Kay Cosmetics was very different. What we saw was enthusiasm, integrity, laughter, and excellence. At first, we could not believe what we were seeing. Every employee was treated with the utmost respect. Even we, the vendors, were treated with respect. No matter what kind of day we had before going to Mary Kay, we knew we would leave there with lifted spirits. As the company grew, we had the opportunity to get to know a lot of people who helped the founder, Mary Kay Ash, carry out her dream. When we encountered a problem, it was not unusual for someone in the sales group to drop what he or she was doing and help us solve it. Very often, a staffer would want to share her enthusiasm for the company with us. During the 10-year business relationship my partner and I had with Mary Kay, we often would talk about how different this organization was from other Fortune 500 companies that were our customers. At most of the other companies, there was a certain kind of coldness. They did not seem to have enthusiasm for their jobs or their customers. A lot of the managers at the other companies had an aloof attitude towards subordinates. Certainly, they didn't have much fun. At Mary Kay, it was just the opposite. They had fun and loved their customers, and it was clear that the managers loved to take a break and join in on the fun. By most qualitative measures, it was very, very different. A student encounters Mary Kay, Inc. What is it that makes outstanding companies different? What is it that causes one company to be a marginal performer while another is flying straight for the heavens? I discovered the answer to that question in 1991 while working on my doctorate in business administration. I was fortunate to study under Dr. H. Igor Ansoff, one of the world's leading experts in the field of strategy. What I discovered while studying under Dr. Ansoff was that companies that perform well meet a specific set of criteria. These principles that define high-performing organization have been the basis of my teaching and consulting ever since. I call them the 9 keys. The difference between companies that meet these 9 criteria and those that do not is striking. If a company meets them, it normally will produce profits between 100 and 300% higher than those of companies that do not. I have had the chance to work with or study many excellent companies that observe most of the 9 keys. Those companies include Southwest Airlines, Tricon, Pizza Hut, KFC, Taco Bell, and TMP Worldwide, to name a few. But in many of my consulting engagements, pride and resistance to change, especially from leaders at the large international companies, have stood in the way of making the necessary improvements. Most company leaders are simply unwilling to make the changes required to create an exceptional company. When I started to study Mary Kay, Inc., I was amazed to find that more than any other company I had encountered, it fit the criteria I was using to predict organizational success. Somehow, completely on her own, Mary Kay had discovered the strategic principles I had worked out in years of study with Dr. Ansoff and others. Far more important, of course, she had managed to build an organization that is based on those practices and principles. The purpose of this book is to reveal these 9 keys as they have been implemented at one exceptional company, Mary Kay, Inc., so that others may learn how to fly straight for the heavens. A professor encounters Mary Kay, Inc. When I made the move into academia as a professor in the field of management, one of the things I started doing at my university was to take graduate students out to major companies and do consulting. In a wonderful coincidence, one of my graduate students had the opportunity to complete a strategic analysis for Mary Kay, Inc. As the students finished their presentation to Richard, Dick, Bartlett, vice chairman and longtime leader at the firm, he began talking to them about his perspective on the management practices and principles that had sustained the company. What I realized at that moment, belatedly, was that one of the best managed companies in the world was in my own backyard. My experiences as a vendor and a student of management had pointed me in this direction, but it took my third exposure for me to finally get it. I decided that the story of Mary Kay, Inc.'s management practices had to be told. Eventually, I asked Dick Bartlett for permission to do the research and write the book. The company routinely turns down movie and book opportunities, and so I wasn't optimistic about my prospects. I'm not sure whether my proposal included an appealing component missing from other such proposals, or whether I was just persistent enough to wear down Dick Bartlett, not an easy task, but he and the company finally consented. The only guidance they offered was that they hoped my book would deliver on the promise in my proposal, to explain the leadership principles of their company. In the course of researching this book, I was invited to observe many meetings. One of the first was a new directors conference at Mary Kay headquarters in Dallas. I must admit that in the back of my mind I was expecting to see a lot of stereotypical part-time beauty consultants who were full-time wives and mothers. What I found was a fascinating group of individuals from diverse backgrounds, almost a microcosm of American society. One woman sitting near me was a physical therapist. She had spent years to gain her educational and professional experience. It appeared that she was well positioned for a great career in a profession that is known for excellent compensation. Another was a dental hygienist. She had achieved the requirements for the sales director position in a few short months. She expected to surpass her hygienist salary with her Mary Kay income within 3 months. Another had owned her own business. Others had a long history with the company, having been independent beauty consultants for 10 or more years. Almost everyone had a unique story about how she had discovered Mary Kay and how the company had changed her life. For many, the connection to the company started when they were customers. In almost every case, they said they had been attracted to the independent sales force because of the attitudes, the camaraderie, and the enthusiasm they had seen in those who pursued a Mary Kay business. While this zeal might be typical of a sales force, one would expect the management team at the corporation to have a different attitude. What I found at the company was the same level of enthusiasm I had found in the independent sales force. In numerous interviews with senior executives, I observed that they also are personally touched by their experiences in this warm environment. Many say that what happened to them in their careers at Mary Kay is that they changed in attitude, life goals, and most important, their business philosophy. Some might describe direct sales companies as being a bit cult-like in nature. There is a strong culture in companies like Mary Kay, and while it may have originated with a single charismatic individual, Mary Kay Ash herself, now the entire leadership team and the rank and file have taken up the cause. It is clear that after more than a decade and a half without Mary Kay Ash in day-to-day management, the firm is not at all dependent on her continued charismatic presence. It is, however, dependent on her principles. Mary Kay Ash was held in the highest regard by everyone who had any contact with her, whether a person worked for the company or not. The firm's management endured some difficult times learning how to make the transition to her retirement and ultimately her passing. Interestingly, however, even as the firm went through those difficult times, sales continued to increase. In fact, except for a short period of time, the average annual sales increase has been in double digits. What is it that has made this a successful company? Why do grown men become downright emotional and passionate when they relate Mary Kay Ash stories, or, more important, when they talk about the countless lives she touched.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?